You're listening to the Making Artwork podcast, a series about people who live in that space between passion and profession. I'm Rob Heslop, and each week we explore what it really means to create, survive, and thrive as a creative entrepreneur. In this episode, the first episode of the series, Ana Paz talks about her journey from performance and spoken word to a deeply reflective practice that bridges art, movement, and heritage. We filmed this podcast virtually since Anna is now studying her PhD in Sweden. I met Anna in Leicester years ago, and we collaborated on our short film called Kick the Gong, which she was a dancer in. Since then, she's gone on to perform in a number of Leicester-based pieces of work. I haven't actually seen Anna for years, so it was nice to catch up and see that she's doing well. Our conversation explores creativity as therapy and the healing power of Capoeira. If you've ever seen Anna dance, especially Capoeira, it's a really fascinating style and flow, especially when she's dancing with someone else as well. Anna is really in touch with what it means to carry the stories of your ancestors into the present, and that sense of timing influencing her practice is a really strong theme in her work. Like I was saying, we were kind of like rewatching a bunch of our favorite stuff, and yours just really stood out. It was like it had such kind of power to the performance, but then all of the other visuals just really poetically kind of combined this sense of like realism, but beauty as well. So I was kind of reflecting on you as a person. I know that you're very kind of conscious and introspective, but also have this drive to be active with your practice as well. So if we can kind of like jump back 5 years ago, where were you at in terms of your headspace, physical space? What was going on with you when we started filming that little project then?
Wow. Yeah. 5 years ago, I think I was going through what I now understand is actually a particular point in time that I think everyone, like when they're like sort of 27, 28, and something starts to break down in your sense of reality of what it is that you've been doing, or so something starts to shift within, and I've been seeing this across the board with even my brother now. He's 26, and I really see that shift happening in him as well. And I think I was just going through that as well, coming out of a long-term relationship. I was also sort of like, 5 years in practicing my art and doing it, and relatively in a comfortable position in terms of where I was in Leicester, where I was living, the people that I had around me, but feeling like deep within myself that I wasn't quite aligned with something, and maybe it was just the fact that I was getting older, and there was some unanswered question inside of me, and I started to feel it just more and more, and then I did the crazy thing of like, through my explorations of like what it is that I need to do, I applied for a master's, and and it was super last minute that I actually got into this course here in Sweden, which is where I am now. But it was a course on culture and change, and I felt that at that time there was something in me that was like, I need to have a period of exploration, of studying, and maybe understanding what is that question that is sort of like burning inside of me, like, maybe I'm yeah, coming into a different space in terms of who I am and what it is that I actually want to do. So I need to explore that. So that's sort of where I was. Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating how often that pattern emerges, like you said, in that kind of age, like 26, 27. It's almost like a quarter life crisis. People are just like, hold on, I feel a bit uncomfortable for whatever reason. And it's probably because you've identified those things about yourself where you're like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be doing that kind of job. I really love this kind of thing and I'm getting quite good at it. But I think in the arts realm as well, in being a kind of creative, moving into being like a creative entrepreneur, it's like, okay, so I'm a pretty good spoken word movement artist. I just want to do that. I don't want to work in an office. How do I get paid for doing that? And like, where does that come from? Um, and that's quite a difficult landscape to break into because to be a professional in that kind of territory, you have to be really sure of yourself and confident and able to articulate what it is that you can deliver to be able to get those commissions that can tip the scale and move you into that kind of freelance life as well. Um, I know so many people who've gone through exactly that same thing. So it's kind of no surprise that you said that, even though I didn't know that at the time. Uh, I guess we were all just on that wave together.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that is something that was very difficult for me at the time. Feeling, like you said, that you're good at something, that there's more that you can bring in terms of the skills that you have, or maybe perhaps, I don't know if you believe in purpose, like if you have a purpose that you came here gifted in something and you want to cultivate that, you want to, give that, not only to yourself, but to the world, right? And then you have to deal with balancing that with, surviving as well. And that was difficult for me to accept that, a lot of my time had to go into surviving. A lot of my time had to go into just, making sure that I have making ends meet, having the rent paid, food, all of that stuff, which means that I have to perhaps work a job, another part-time job that I'm not happy in, or that I'm not feeling like I'm enacting the things that I feel are, you know, important to me, perhaps. Yeah, I think that that's the main thing, is like you're not aligned with the values and the things that are important to you. And then that's the space maybe perhaps that you're spending most of your time in, And so then that starts to breed, I think, a little bit of resentment, or just not feeling good within yourself, not feeling aligned within yourself. So I think that point, I was really at the edge of that. Like I had been going through that. And then I was like, I'm ready to like stop complaining and do something about it, because I have more to give. So yeah.
That's really empowering, but scary as well when you're like, I'm about to take a leap of faith and see where. And for me, that was the masters. But just before we go into that, if we can talk a little bit about that spoken word piece that you performed beautifully for us, we kind of got a sense of what that was about. I think in our kind of pre-production talks, and it was about empty space and floating, and then we shot that with the intention of kind of echoing that in the visuals. And you were just looking back on it, that light was way too dim, like because you almost disappear into that darkness around you, which is nice artistically, but technically when you look at it, it's so dark. But forgiven that, I think it had a real sense of power, those visuals and those words. What was kind of going through your mind? What was the inspiration for writing that piece? I know it was half a decade ago, so yeah.
Yeah, that piece. is really reflective of that journey, actually, this journey of not knowing exactly where you're going, right? But also feeling that you do know where you're going, that you do have a sense of self, that you do have a sense of, you know, your integrity, your authenticity, what you bring into a space. You do know that, but you don't necessarily know how that's going to manifest. And so it was almost like me playing around with that, uh, those two worlds of, being in complete darkness, but being a light, obviously, as well, that is moving somehow in this darkness. Um, yeah, so I feel like that was really reflective of where I was at the time, feeling maybe a little bit lost, but at the same time, and I think I said this to you. Now I'm a big believer that in terms of time, like I don't really see it in this linear way. That I actually see it as more as a circle, cyclical way. That the past, the present, and the future are always having a conversation with one another. And that moment in which I wrote that is just another moment of me having a conversation with all of me, yeah, the past, the present, and the future. So that's kind of the sort of essence of it. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, really interesting that it's kind of like an ode to who you were, and that person got you there with those words, ready to speak them and articulate all those feelings. But also, it's about your kind of forecast of how that person is going to take you forward as well. That's some complex shit, man. And I think that's a really interesting part of, like, as we were filming together, um, you just seemed so present in what you were doing, but conscious of, you almost had this like objectivity to it as well. Like you understood the context, which it all kind of was grounded in as well. And I guess that sets you up really nicely for your masters, because so it was culture and change, is it? So it has that kind of permeation of subjective into objective. It's about like the duality of both of them in a way. Um, I mean, from what you've told me, that's what I've got. I might be totally off track, but how would you describe it?
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. That it sort of set me up to be in a space like that, that was engaging obviously with history or with the present, but was also sort of looking to the future, understanding how or the ways that we can transform or create the futures that we want. And that was, essentially me. What I've been doing with my poetry is that, so when I saw that course, I was like, oh yeah, I have to do this, or I have to at least apply. And the funny thing is that, it wasn't just about me doing a master's, but it was also about me going into a bit of an unknown space, which is also a bit reflective of that poem, actually, like of knowing that something, feeling that fear, maybe even going through something painful, actually, but understanding that you will come on the other side, right? And I actually remember when I went, because I only received an email to say that I got in a week before the course would start. And yeah, exactly. Listen, so for me, I was already planning, to kind of continue the things that I was doing. I even think I was thinking about going back to London. And I actually was, yeah, I even had a job already with a hip hop theater company at the time. So, I was doing my thing. And then I received that email. And it was really, encapsulating that moment of like surrender, of like, and going into the unknown. I mean, I had a day where I was like, I'm not going to do this. It's crazy. Like, to 1 week to just go to a different country where you don't know anyone. This particular region, I'd never been here before. and to also do a master's, like, which is no small feat really. And at the time I was only really considering myself as a creative or as an artist. So what am I gonna do, like go into this country as a foreigner and doing a master's, like really like coming into this academic space? It was crazy, right? So I was just like, okay, surrender time, let's go, you know? So yeah.
Oh, really brave of you to do that. It's like kind of what I was like saying about the quarter life crisis is usually midlife crisis. People buy a boat or a motorbike, and they're like, "I'm just going to go do that." But you took on a master's in a different continent. This is crazy. So just to pick up on what you said about you're working in a hip hop theater um, or hip hop theater company. What was your role there? What was that kind of job like, and how did you get into that?
Yeah, it was a bit of an interesting role. They were sort of engaging creatives to engage with their work. So whether they were dancers, poets, illustrators, they sort of brought in creatives to engage with the theatre production that they had at the time, which was called Black Dog, which Far From the Norm is the hip hop theatre company. And then also you were a content creator, so you were sort of engaging with their work, creating work, engaging with their work, and also getting other people to engage with their work whilst you're creating something. So it was like a way of yeah, it was all sort of integrating artists, um and also we had like workshops as well with the people who were involved in the production of that particular piece. So we were, you know, also exploring our creativity. And so it was a way of like sort of workshopping and understanding who we are, what it is that we create, and then utilizing that to create something that was, you know, sort of based off what it is that they created, you know. So it was like a bit of inspiration in a way. So it, yeah, something like that, something like that. So I didn't even really see it as a job. I just saw it as really cool opportunity to meet like-minded people, to create more work, and you know, get paid for it as well. So yeah,
Amazing. And that was kind of supporting you through living in Leicester and doing your own thing as well.
yeah. So I actually received that role when I moved to Sweden. So it was literally August, end of August, going into September. Yeah, and so I actually was in that role whilst I was in Sweden. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was coming to London. I was like coming back quite often, actually, to be fair, that first year, because I still, you know, it was too quick, you know, to just move like that in 1 week. So I was still having my ties, you know, to the UK and to Leicester, to London. So I was coming back and forth quite a lot, I would say. Yeah.
That time must have been demanding quite a lot on you, kind of physically through like traveling, but also emotionally, mentally, creatively. You must have had quite a strong kind of creative resilience to keep producing that work and thinking in that way whilst you were caught up in that kind of like new lifestyle and literally kind of spanning different, like spanning an ocean in between you.
Yeah, you know, this is just comes back to how for some of us, you know, who maybe we come from cultures where, you know, we don't really have access, or we really don't have the education to understand that sometimes we need outlets. Maybe not, our creativity basically is our outlet, is our therapy essentially. And I say this because I also remember that that year I was going through a loss, you know, bereavement, you know, of a very close family member actually. And that was something that I was also navigating, I remember. And it just happened very suddenly. And it was around the time in which I was actually moving to Sweden. Yeah. So in a way, this work and moving and it was a way for me to have an outlet. It was a way for me to have my, sort of therapy in a sense, to explore what it was that I was feeling, and so it was actually really helpful for me that crazy time.
That is a crazy time. I mean, that's kind of as peak as it gets, really, isn't it? Like the whole, yeah, grief intertwined with moving house and having a job, and just that's for most people that's as like stressful as life gets. Really, it's interesting hearing you talk about this now because obviously I didn't know most of these things as we were filming, but just kind of my mind scanning over certain frames of the footage. So just to kind of give a bit of context, when we filmed you, we did the spoken word piece, and then we filmed you moving, and we just wanted you to be absolutely free in whatever you wanted to do there. So I think we set up a light, we had a couple of cameras, and I was just moving around you. It was almost like we were, because I've seen the other camera that can see me with you. It was almost like we were dancing together, but I had a camera and I was trying to move with how you were moving, and those different emotions, that kind of spectrum of all the things that you were feeling at that time. I can kind of pick out little frames of that movement, those sequences where I can see that. I think there's a bit in the current edit that looks like you're really in pain. There's this moment where everything just kind of stops and you just have this really intense kind of hurt look on your face. And then that moves into something quite aggressive. It's all these kind of like really strong jerking kind of movements as well, which is almost like coming to grips or trying to kind of like wrangle those feelings. And then there's moments of just pure kind of lucidity where you're almost floating and reaching up to the sky. And it's a real spectrum in the footage that we got. So I was really interested to hear you kind of go back over what was happening in your life, because it's really reflective of that, I think.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I actually got a bit emotional when you described it, actually, because I think sometimes we forget what it is that we did, created, performed, and where that was coming from. And when you articulate it, like when you bring also voice to that, or remember it, which is something that I'm working with a lot, this aspect of the body remembering, it helps you to understand, yeah, exactly where you were at in that moment and why you were creating what you were creating in that moment. And yeah, I think it's very reflective of what I was feeling, all of those layers that you said, things being really hard, rigid, but then also flowing because it has to flow, because it has to go somewhere, you know what I mean? But yeah, it was, and yeah, and those moments of reflection, of being still. And I think that is like to do with really just being present of what is it that you're holding, you know? And I still do that, today. Like I still have those moments of just, whether it is that I'm meditating, or even if I'm creating something, or even if I'm speaking, and then I have a moment that I'm just like, just here, and there's something in that space and it's communicating something to you. So I actually see it as like I keep saying, I'm always having a conversation with myself, like some aspect of self, present, past, or future is trying to communicate to me. And sometimes, yeah, it's visible, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely visible. I think even if couldn't articulate it at the time, just kind of sensed it. Like reflecting on it now, I think it's how you've described it is really, yeah, really visible. Is that do you channel that kind of presence through your capoeira practice as well? Because I see you on Instagram pretty much every day, just doing your thing. Sometimes by yourself, sometimes with the people. And it seems like you find like a real flow in that. There's something coming out. Is that almost a like a meditative practice for you as well?
Yeah, I think that it has become in the last. So I've been practicing capoeira for 6 years now, or 6 or 7 years now. And but I mean, prior to that, my background is like performing arts, and I went to drama school, and so I have been sort of working and cultivating how to be in my presence on stage, right? Like how to use my voice on a stage, how to use my body in a very particular way to communicate a particular message, right? But apart from that, what I've been building on is also, um, with hip hop. That's also something that's in my foundation, something that has always been part of like my movement as well. And then even before that, when I just think about my culture, where I've come from, and the rhythms and sounds and the movements from that, also how that's in my body too, right? And it informs me and my practice and what I do. So whether that is like samba or kizomba, all of these traditions are like things that are, informing my practice. But in the last 6 years, it's been capoeira that has been the main sort of thing at the forefront, because that has been, yeah, in a way, it encapsulates everything that I have been sort of trying to create, this sort of language of engaging with resistance, engaging with the past, engaging, with the present, engaging with movement, engaging with spirituality, with reflectiveness, engaging with sound, with rhythm, with music, and engaging with the oral tradition, of using the voice to tell a story. So this practice for me is, I see it as such an important aspect of my creative practice now, because it's informing me in all of the layers of the things that I use in my practice. It's there. It's inside this art, this or martial art people call it, but I think you can't really define it as one thing, because it's so many things. It's so many things. So, and there is an aspect of it that is very healing as well, to do this practice. So I do see, you know, part of me practicing it is not necessary. I mean, maybe in the beginning it was like, yeah, because it's kind of cool, like, to strengthen yourself, to find that, force to be able to do something quite maybe acrobatic or whatever it may be. But the more I do it, it does become more of like a meditation or a mantra of resistance, and of cultivating some kind of sense of self, like understanding yourself even more, even more. Yesterday you think you couldn't do that thing, now you can do this thing. You know what I mean? And just doing it for that sake of just knowing your body, knowing its limits, knowing its capacity, knowing how it comes into conversation with other bodies, knowing when it feels uncomfortable, knowing when it feels happy. Like, so really I just see capoeira now as more as a healing practice of understanding what we carry in our bodies, right? And it's also an ode to our ancestors as well. So that's another layer to it for me, that's why it becomes so important to me. It's like really remembering everything that has come before you, everyone that has come before you, and how that is something present in you right now. So yeah.
Wow, that's so poignant, and I'm so sorry, Anna. I've got like an error message about running out of free disk space, which sucks. What bad timing! I've got so much to kind of unpick from that, but I'm just going to pause. So, yeah, I was talking about capoeira being that kind of meditative practice to you, and you were talking about what it is about capoeira that kind of makes it that.
Yeah, because I think in a way you can't really define it just as a martial art. Capoeira is, has so many layers to it, that I think touch on all the layers um, of things that influence my practice, essentially, whether it's to do with music, or if it's to do with the spirituality or reflectiveness, or whether it's to do with rhythm, sound, whether it's to do with, the voice, obviously, using the voice to tell stories, um, and having conversation with your body, understanding your body, performing in a way. Let's say that, that element is there as well. So it holds so much, but it's so reflective of like how I've been cultivating my practice over the years, using all of those layers to create something, to say something, to tell a story. And, and I really do feel like there's an aspect of it that for me, maybe in the beginning, it was more about, what actually brought me to capoeira was that I actually saw that it told stories. That's the main thing that I saw. It wasn't that it was, just this acrobatic martial art, but actually there's stories within this space, right? But then, after a while, maybe you're more engaged with, trying to do really cool stuff, or like, engaging with the more acrobatic aspects of it. But the deeper that you go into it, you start to see how much it holds stories, like how much it holds history, and especially things that I would say may have been lost, in the past, like in our history. So it gives me an opportunity to like remember something. It gives me an opportunity to remember something not only in myself, but those that have come before me, everyone and everything that has come before me, how that informs who I am, where I am, and the story that I have to tell, So it has become more and more like in the present now for me, something that can be a bit like a meditation or a bit like a prayer, because it's me engaging with myself, being reflective of myself, but also honoring that which has come before me, everything that has come before me that has placed me where I am today. So it becomes much more deep for me. The practice is not just about, moving, it is about looking inside of yourself and then seeing where that takes you, like how far that takes you, and then it obviously pulls you back to the present. Where am I? What am I doing? And how am I moving forward? So yeah.
Which again just feeds into that kind of conversation with your past, present, and future self. It's like an extension of that. It's like the past, like before you. There's this accumulative effect of all of the meaning and the kind of origins behind capoeira as well. I think you said the word kind of resistance, which, I mean, I'm going to show my ignorance now, but my understanding of it is it was prisoners who developed the kind of art form to practice fighting in a way that looked more like dance, so that they weren't kind of brought up in it. Is vaguely.
Vaguely in the right direction, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. This is also an aspect of like how, like what I said, things have been lost about understanding what exactly this practice is. But, essentially, the most general way to put it is that those who were enslaved Africans that were taken to the Americas, in particular Brazil, they created a way to fight essentially with their body. And they were doing this not as just by coincidence, something that just happened, but actually within the Americas, not just in Brazil, they created a lot of camps, let's say, like war camps. In Brazil, they're called quilombos. In the Caribbean, you have like the Maroons. Like, so these are like spaces where people are basically creating their own worlds. Essentially, they're creating the way that they want to have their values. They want to be free, men and women, and they're fighting against a particular system that they don't agree with. So, which in this situation is the enslavement of Africans. So in those particular war camps, they are finding ways to fight, essentially, to educate themselves, to also, grow food, agriculture. Like, so it's just essentially creating the world that they want, the world that they believe that they are entitled to. And in that is also a way to, to have force, a way to fight, and capoeira was a part of that as well. So obviously throughout the years, it has become a bit, linked to criminal activity. It was something that was criminalized, like you could not do capoeira, basically. And that's where maybe you have that information that there was people that were considered criminals or considered on the wrong side of, life, that were capoeira, because capoeira was a street thing. It was like something that was more expressed and practiced on the street before it became something that was tied to, Brazil's independence and identity. And then they started to kind of, polish it and become like more of a martial art that is, done inside a building, in an academy and this sort of thing. So, that's a very brief general history of like what capoeira is. But essentially for me, as someone who is, that has Angolan roots, and within capoeira, a lot of the stories reference Angola. So it references people that were coming from there, essentially. So a general understanding of capoeira is that some aspects of it, of its ritual, of its music, or whatever it may be, or if it's of the languages that are there, has come from Angola. Not just Angola, but that is one aspect of it. So for me, it does become very personal in me understanding some aspect of what my ancestors may have gone through in terms of survival, in terms of resistance, and then understanding how that I hold that in my body, how that is active in me in my present world, So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I think it's so interesting to hear you describe the qualities of it and the circumstances that helped the kind of practice to come to fruition, because that's a lot of those same qualities are what you've described about your own practice. So you obviously align with it so much, and it's that same kind of story as well of like it becoming more polished and commercialized. Same as it, like most kind of counterculture, hip hop being like a prime example for that. Um, it's it must be interesting for you to, because it seems like you have quite a holistic practice of it as well. It's it defines a part of you, and you practice it because you care about all of that history. It's not just you don't go to like a studio class on a Thursday evening to do it. It's like part of your daily rituals to practice that. And I guess a part of that is remembering ancestors and reinvigorating those kind of qualities and history and meaning of it as well. So how much of that comes into your masters? Because obviously that's about culture and change, and it seems like capoeira is almost the epitome of that. It's such a strong, I mean, forgive me for like bastardizing it in kind of corporate terms, but it's like a strong case study for that. Yeah, how much does that influence your kind of thinking throughout your masters? So you've done your masters now.
Yeah, I've graduated. I'm done. Thank you. And yeah, actually, I did do my master's thesis or research on capoeira. Actually, yeah. So, and even before I did my thesis, my research when I went to Brazil and everything, but before that, I think it was already informing me. It was already informing the ways that I was thinking, the ways that I was writing, the ways that, so there is something about practice. And I think maybe you can agree with that. When we engage in practice, whatever practice that may be, that it over time starts to obviously change and shift the way that you do stuff, like the way that you walk, basically, the way that you go to the shop, or the way that, which way that you go, or who you decide to be friends with, or whatever it may be. So it started to ring that sort of bell in my head of like, practice is important. Like, how we engage with our bodies is so important about the decisions we make about, and if it's in academia, how, let's say, we engage with research, then what we hold in our bodies and like how we engage with our bodies actually is informing the way that we make research, the way that we see, like the perspective that we have. So yeah, so then, I did do my research. I went to Brazil, and I was exploring, the experiences specifically of Black women doing the practice, because in Europe, I saw that it was hardly any of us doing it. And I thought, for some reason, that stayed with me. Of course, also being a Black woman. So I was like, I want to understand why. And then what that did is actually it opened the door to understanding so many embodiments or aspects of the ancestral things that are within capoeira that wasn't visible when I was in these spaces, maybe here in Europe or whatever it may be. So it took for me to look at it from a different angle, to see something that wasn't there, to actually see that there is more underneath, right? So then I was like, rah, okay, like, what you're saying, this practice has the potential of like change, because it can change how we even perceive, yeah, something like capoeira. Imagine like, you know, other aspects of our culture that has greatly shaped the way that we are in society, right? Imagine if we can reframe that, recenter that in some kind of way through the lens of that which is not always put in the forefront, which is at times those of the global majority. Our perspectives, our stories, our way of seeing things, our history is always put through a lens that is more westernized or more Eurocentric. So, of course, there will be things that are missing there. There will be things that are, you know, will not be understood in the same way. And I started to understand. I mean, I still don't understand this practice, but I feel like I started to get a deeper understanding of it only when I started to see things in that way.
Mm. That's a massive perspective to gain. Amazing that you traveled to Brazil to kind of absorb some of that and then have to translate it to a page to kind of capture that. It must have been, I mean, how difficult was that to then kind of put it in like academic terms? Yeah, because it's not, because it must be so intangible. Because as I was watching you kind of dance, it seemed like it was such an expressive experience and moment. That must be really hard to put into words and give it that same kind of impact.
But that's the thing. That was the resistance that I had to endure in order to have clarity about what it is that I'm saying. It was not easy, because at some point I was like, man, I can't write this. I have to, make something, or I have to maybe do a podcast, or I have to do something that is engaging with those elements. I mean, it's difficult to write this in an academic way. And I had to kind of, battle it out, with my supervisor and find some kind of happy medium where I was still writing in an academic way, but within my thesis, I have a lot of reflections and poetry, actually. And I use those things to sort of anchor what it is that I'm going to analyze. So I use those reflections that I have, those memories, and photographs as well. I was also taking photographs when I was in Brazil to bring you into some kind of feeling or some kind of sense of what it is that I'm saying. And then I talk about it in this sort of, academic way of, analyzing it with theory and this sort of stuff. But it was important for me to have that, to have like my voice first. Like you have to understand where I'm coming from first, or what it is that I hold, to be able to kind of understand why I'm saying what I'm saying, right? And that was unique for me, because I never thought that you could do research without being sort of separated from it, sort of being from the outside looking in. And I was like, no, I'm inside and I'm looking in. I'm a part of this and I'm looking in. And that is the perspective that I want you to see, that it's also important for us to understand that knowledge begins from where you are, and that is like the thing that I'm obsessed with now. Like, yeah.
Is I think I mentioned on our call about, I think it's like a John Cleese quote about like you can't be creative and analytical at the same time. Like one comes after the other. So it's interesting to hear you say that you are inside and looking in. It's like you're in that kind of like you said, it's cyclical, the way that one thing kind of informs the other. It's almost like a feedback loop of the practice informing the academia, but then it will come back round again. And eventually, somewhere in that, you need to kind of extrapolate a dissertation and submit that. So, one of the kind of quotes that comes to mind from your interview from 5 years ago was that you said that we were talking about your future self and where you want to take your practice. And you said, my practice might look quite weird in the next 5 years. And kind of it's quite apt that it has been 5 years. And considering everything that you were just saying, where are you at now in terms of your headspace, your practice? Obviously, your physical space is very different. You're still in, is it Stockholm in Sweden?
I'm in Malmo.
Malmo. Okay, cool. I'm not going to pretend to know.
It's down south. It's down south, and it's actually closer to Copenhagen. Usually, when I fly in, I fly into Copenhagen, and I get a train to Sweden. It's like a 10-20 minute train to Malmo, which is a smaller city down on the south of Sweden. Yeah.
Okay, cool, nice. So is it the flat you're in now that I see on Instagram you practicing capoeira?
I moved around a bit, but I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe, probably. Yeah.
Cool. So then, where else do you practice? If we're thinking about that kind of physical, mental, emotional, creative spaces, where do all those kind of land where you're at now?
Yeah, so I work at a gallery here, actually, Skånes Konstförening. So they do like exhibitions, and they're very tied, actually, in a similar way to some of the values that I have, obviously, as an artist. And so I actually use that space. They, let me use that space to physically be there, and practice my practice. But also my home, like more than ever, like wherever it is that I'm dwelling, like that is my home, is also a space that I have to sort of create space for me to be able to create. So, like around me, I have my instruments here, I have the drum, I have the birimbau, I have space that I create in order to move as well. So I feel like I have to feel that wherever I'm living is also a space that I can create. It's also a space that I can move, or, just engage with that part of me. And that's been something more, how do you say, that I've been taking more seriously, actually. Because if it is to be a practice, and an everyday practice, really, then it has to be in your everyday space somehow, So, yeah. Yeah, I mean the consistency, I mean to have discipline, but not in a rigorous way, but just in the fact that you kind of create the conditions so that that can happen, what I mean? Like, so if I didn't remove, let's say, the sofa in this space and I didn't put it there, then that open space wouldn't be there. So maybe I would be less inclined to put my hand on the floor and start to do stuff, right? Or if I didn't have this drum here or this microphone here, maybe I would be less inclined to record a podcast or to whatever it may be. So I'm trying to be more particular, about how I put things in my space, books, this, whatever, so that I keep calling myself back to my practice, to my study, to, every day, somehow.
Yeah, it's a clever psychological trick to have anchors in the room to just be like, I feel like doing that, just do it. It's accessible straight away. It's interesting. We've been working in schools and kind of early years settings recently, and it's all about child-led music making. And a big thing, a big change that they've made is to have the instruments out and not in a cupboard, because that whole thing of just like, oh, if we're going to do music, we'll have to get stuff out of the cupboard, just interrupts the flow completely. So it's kind of echoes what you're saying. It's just, if it's there, it's accessible and you just go straight to it and there's no kind of block. You're just surrounding yourself with all of those kind of reminders that that's what you want to do and that's what you need to kind of keep up with. So clever. You've kind of tricked yourself into just making it more of a regular. So thank you so much for your time. I think we've kind of come into like a nice natural close now. But I'd like to finish just asking you that same question of what do you think your practice is going to look like in the next 5 years? And who knows, we might even revisit it when it comes to a full decade. You said that you're applying for a PhD. That will obviously be probably quite a huge factor in influencing what you do, but it sounds like you're on a really strong trajectory, and I love that you're continuing what you were doing back then. Obviously it must have strengthened and evolved in really profound ways. So do you have any idea of what it will look like in 5 years? Like what kind of direction are you heading into?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if I'm to do this PhD, that will obviously affect what I'll be doing in the next 5 years, but maybe not necessarily. I think what this time doing this master's or this last 5 years has been about clarity. It's been about, with my poetry, with how I use my body, what is it that I am trying to communicate, and being very clear about that. And now I think I got to a point where I understand that I want to place myself in a position where I'm highlighting stories from the global majority. Like that is essential for me. That, you know, that perspective is not lost in, this milky way of how it is that we're living our lives right now and conforming to whatever we need to conform to in order to make money. Is like, I understand now that there's something that I'm supposed to do that is about looking backwards. It's about looking backwards, not to stay there, but to understand where it is exactly that we're standing in this moment, so that we can create the futures that we actually want. And I believe that it starts with us understanding what stories we hold in ourselves, and of course, being a Black woman of African descent, I am focused on that particular narrative, this particular perspective of how we can come into that space of remembering who we were before colonization. And what does that do to you? How does that expand this body in the present? What does that do to healing, relationships, wounds, trauma? I'm really interested in that aspect of it. What the ways I'm engaging with capoeira is not to think about it as, not to limit it, let's say, as a martial art, but potentially as a somatic practice, that helps individuals, not just people of the African descent, but anyone really, because I see that actually it's already doing that. Capoeira is like all over the world and it speaks to everyone in some way. And I believe it's because it penetrates those layers of like, who are you? You know what I mean? What is it that you're doing and why? And I think when we start from that which is not something easy, actually, I think it's something very heavy sometimes and very difficult to navigate. But if we can do that, if we can go through that, I think that we give ourselves a better foundation for what it is that we really want to create, what it is that we really want to see for our futures, for not just ourselves, but those who will come after us, actually. So again, that feedback loop, that conversation, past, present, and future, that's it.
Wow, what a perfect punchline to the whole conversation. I think you're obviously thinking very big in terms of meaning, and it sounds like capoeira is the perfect practice to kind of accommodate that therapeutic journey of understanding yourself, which is what everyone's really trying to do, isn't it? Because you can't do stuff that well unless you do. to contrast your beautifully articulated point with some really kind of dumbed down.
But that's it. Like, it really is that simple, Rob. Like, you really, that's what I meant when knowledge begins from where you are. Like, or, when you have what's that quote, know thyself. Like, why why is that so profound, even though it's so simple? Because it is about that. It is about us knowing ourselves, not just on the surface level, but really knowing who are you, what is it that you know want to say, and why. And I can only imagine that is going to help us to create more bridges, you know what I mean? And to create things that we actually like and help us, you know what I mean? That's my opinion on that, though.
So I think Anna is an interesting example of a creative investigating the work through an academic lens. The more she learns about her own sense of self, the more her identity as an artist evolves. And she's not afraid to keep it all ticking over with a part-time side hustle. Anna's story is about movement in every sense of the word. Movement through life's transitions, through grief, through new landscapes, and of course through her own body. I found the way that she described her practice becoming a conversation between her past, present, and future self amazing and very meta. Capoeira isn't just a martial art for her, it's a way of remembering and connecting with history while defining a new language for her own self-understanding. She's obviously very thoughtful and articulate, and I really enjoy talking to her. I'm not a massive fan of the virtual thing, but Sweden's a bit of a trek from Leicester. So that was Anna on the Making Artwork podcast. Check out her mini documentary episode that we released alongside this. And I'll also put links to Anna and her work in the show notes. I'm Rob Heslop, and this podcast was produced by Rendah Films. Thanks for watching.